I've been involved with the restoration of the Tsolum before there was a Tsolum River Restoration Society. I was involved with the Tsolum River Task Force, which was a government and agency task force looking at the problems in the Tsolum, essentially the lack of fish. That was probably in about 1997.
I've been living on the Tsolum River for almost 40 years. And between my partner Ann and myself, we've been involved in the Tsolum River Society or its precursors for over 20 years.
So I've been involved with the Tsolum River for about since 1998 or so. My spouse and I moved to the Tsolum River from Down Island, and we rented a place right on the river, and so there was on that really hot summer. So the newspapers around here said that the Tsolum was dead, and we lived on a big deep hole, and we went snorkeling and saw tons of steelhead salmon in it. And then there was also a flood channel that dried up and it had baby coho. So they had an ad in the paper, and we saw it and said, come and help for fry salvaging, for salvaging the tiny fish.
It's a long and sad history since the settlers came. Essentially, the settlers, the best area when they came was right around the Tsolum. All the lands that the First Nations essentially had developed for themselves and created large prairies were the ones that the settlers picked because there was no trees to remove. And those that did move upriver essentially removed a lot of the trees from the banks of the river. And there was a logging company who came in at one time and dumped all the big logs into the river and built a dam up on Wolf Lake to sluice them down like they do in the east.
They put dams in and they blew out a lot of stuff, and they wrecked the gravel. And then the logging was awful in those days. They logged right down to the river, took everything away, and took a lot of the land cover, the trees off the land.
Well, the biggest thing when I got involved was a big push to fix the mine site pollution. So it had been determined, just as we got involved, for sure that was causing the pink salmon and other adult salmon not to come back to the river. So that was the main issue when I first started. There's been many more since then, but the impetus, our first job was to lobby government to fix the mine site pollution.
We always say that the logging essentially reduced the runs to a very minimum, and the copper essentially didn't allow the runs to recover.
Well, I think the biggest accomplishment that this society has accomplished in the last while is the general habitat restoration. Everything from riparian planting to fixing gravel bars and replanting them, and helping with erosion, and lobbying the powers that be to do this and that over issues of land use and things like that.
Well, I think the biggest one is having government put up $4.5 million to fix that mine site so it doesn't cause the acid mine drainage.
Probably the biggest thing was the copper, reducing the copper, because no agency would look at actually funding any habitat rehabilitation on the Tsolum as long as that chemical pollution was in the water. So that lobbying for the mine site essentially to actually get that covered was probably the biggest accomplishment. The first one, the highest priority, was that gravel bar planting. So that's been completed. So now we're going to be sitting down and deciding where next to go, where the next projects would be for the best bang for the buck to actually bring the fish back.
So the goals of the society our overarching goal is to restore the Tsolum to historic levels of productivity and health. That's becoming abundantly clear with climate change that we may not achieve that goal. So we just want to make the best river system for the animals. All the directors and myself as well, we believe that we want to do the least amount of work for the biggest benefit for nature. Nature will take care of itself if us humans stop interfering with it in negative ways.
Well, we have lots of programs. We have programs for planting. We have programs for counting fish and enhancing fish. There's a lot of programs centered around fish. Fish are a good indicator species of what's going on in the watershed. So if you can measure that, that tells you a lot about what's going on.
Yes, the Puntledge Hatchery, we work with Fisheries and Oceans and the Puntledge Hatchery there's an old dam on Wolf Lake, which is up in Merville at the bottom of Mount Washington. There's an old dam there, and so while we were lobbying for remediation of the mine site, we were doing enhancement projects, and we used an old hatchery that Fisheries and Oceans had in Merville to make 1 million pink salmon babies, and we let them go every year for 13 years.
Well, that's essentially the one we've been dealing with. It's climate change didn't just happen now that people are talking about it. It's been happening all along, and we have always said that our problem with the Tsolum River is high flows in the wintertime and low flows in the summertime, and that's really accentuated by climate change. Essentially, during the summer you get those long periods of drought, so you have essentially you have a discontinuous river kind of thing. The fish can't move up and down the reaches kind of thing because they get separated just by the various riffles and that type of thing in the river.
Well, it's an ongoing problem getting enough water into the river in the summer. So we have projects to try to get more water out of some of the reservoirs. Just by the very fact of putting shade over the river and planting along the bank, you can increase the water a little bit. Well, there's all sorts of problems in the river, and we're only just scratching the surface. The fact that we've lost a lot of tree cover, especially along the river, is really important because it means there's not enough good fish habitat, and which gets into a second big problem, which is the general category of hydrology. The river is flashy. It floods in the winter, causing erosion and silting and gravel movement and that sort of problem. And it dries up in the summer, so there's not enough water for the fish for them to get access to their spawning grounds, and let alone enough gravel in the spawning grounds for them to do the thing.
The restoration of the river has already benefited the wildlife hugely, especially the fish populations and the invertebrate, so the bug population in the river, due to they don't get that copper spike anymore, so they don't get wiped out on a yearly or every second year. So we've already seen huge returning fish presence from when I first got involved.
Well, certainly the Tsolum has always been known for its pink runs for number one. That was probably the biggest thing that drew people to the Tsolum back in the day kind of thing, the commercial fishermen fishing the pink. But the other major fish in the Tsolum is coho, and the coho they spend a whole year in the river. They spend the whole summer after they're born in the river before they go out in the next spring freshet kind of thing. So they're the ones that we hope to see most come back.
Well, yeah, more salmon species is obvious. We'd like to know what our steelhead situation is. They're kind of the iconic fish in the river, and as far as we know, the last time we looked several years ago, there was only 20 or 30 does coming up. So it may be better than that, but they're very hard to find and hard to count.
Probably the things in the summertime is to be aware of what's happening in the river kind of thing. That we have a booth at Music Fest here because we get so many people in the river. It's the same with, as I was talking about with the salmon. When you get too many salmon in the river, you can deplete the oxygen. You get too many people in the river, the same thing can happen kind of thing. We get we wash off of bodies and that type of thing kind of thing.
The community has been quite involved. When I started, we were very community-minded. The society grew out of meetings. So a couple people noticed, where'd all the fish go, like especially the steelhead, because they were quite obvious back in the 1960s and 1970s. And then people started asking questions of our local Fisheries and Oceans. There was an office in Comox, and of the Ministry of Environment, both federally and provincially. Where's all the fish? There used to be tons of fish here, where'd they all go? And that's prompted a couple of large meetings of many stakeholders, including governments, all levels.
Well, the obvious thing is just get involved. I think I think if I had one message for them, it would be, this is a small part of much bigger environmental problems, but at least it's a start. And I think we can have an effect by doing our bit on the Tsolum River.